Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I know some of you are still trickling in, so feel free to get settled in and familiar here with the web interface. We are going to get started. My name is Samantha Diebel, and I am the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement at the University of Colorado Boulder's Leeds School of Business. Leeds is a top business school offering undergraduate, MBA, MS, and PhD programs, and has an alumni network of over 41,000 strong living and working around the world. We're excited to have Jason Hanson presenting on leveraging your strengths throughout your career today. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. First, if you have any questions now or during the presentation that you would like to ask Jason, please send those through the chat interface. I'll monitor those questions as they're submitted, and Jason will answer them at the end of his presentation. We also have the questions that were submitted during the registration process. As a reminder for optimum audio quality, we do have everyone on mute except for myself and our speaker. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please do notify us through the chat interface, and one of our support specialists will touch base. Upon leaving the webinar today, you'll be prompted by Zoom to visit an external website which will take you to our brief feedback survey. Your feedback helps drive future content and speakers. Lastly, a link to access the webinar recording will be sent to all registrants tomorrow. And just a quick thing before I introduce our presenter, I do want to share that one of the reasons why we selected strengths and this topic today is because it's a large part of the university experience here at CU. So both staff and faculty have access to trainings as part of a professional development resource. It's part of that portfolio of continued learning for faculty and staff. And it's also a really integral part of the Leeds student experience here at the Leeds School of Business. Our freshmen go through a seminar where they take their strengths assessment to learn their top 5, just like you did, and then they go through a seminar to learn how to leverage these both in their career and throughout their time as a student. So you'll get a glimpse of that today and what our students are experiencing here at Leeds. And with that, I'd like to now introduce today's speaker, Jason Hanson. Jason has been helping clients and students leverage the ways that they most naturally think, feel, and behave for higher levels of impact for the past 20 years. Today, he primarily serves as a strengths coach and leadership coach for high achievers and early to mid-level leaders. Welcome, Jason, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Sam. I'm so excited to be here. It's wonderful to join you and to talk about strengths with the CU community. I myself have been a big fan of CU since I grew up in Chicago, but we moved out to Colorado around 3.5 years ago, and I was excited to plug back in and see what the university was doing, see what kind of strengths programs existed, because that had been in my background. And I have to say I've been so impressed with what CU is doing generally, what Leeds is doing specifically, and so many other great programs on campus. I think it's just really exciting to be here with you today. Thanks for having me. I will make sure I deliver on your time for you today. We will be on time, we will be engaging, and we will make sure that you leave with some concrete things that will enrich your experience in work and other areas of your life. So that's our goal and our promise to you. To get us started, I'm going to ask a few audience poll questions. Sam's going to take over for a moment on this one.
Great. Let's launch the first one here. So I have a basic working or greater familiarity with my strengths, yes or no? Leave it open for a few more moments here. All right, so Jason, as you can see, the majority, if not almost all, have a basic working or greater familiarity with their strengths. So
Thank you, that's great.
Yes, very exciting.
That helps us know how to tailor this to who's in the room here, so to speak.
And
thank you.
Of course, yep. And then we have 3 more questions, true or false. So the first question is the best in a role all get there the same way, true or false? All right, and just about everyone has responded here. So the majority, Jason, say false.
That's what Gallup would say. That's what I would say. I think we've all had personal experiences that have shown us that. What we're going to talk a lot about today is ways to get to your desired outcomes that also leverage and magnify what you're best at. So just a quick preview for us. Thanks, Sam. Can we do the
Wonderful.
next one, please?
Yes, of course. All right, so the next question here. Weakness fixing prevents failure. Developing our talents into strengths is our best shot at achieving excellence. True or false? Looks like almost half have responded here, so we'll leave it open a few more seconds. All right, thank you. And Jason, 79% say true, 23% say false.
That's the premise that I am going to put forth today, that if we are focusing on our weaknesses, which is what we've mostly been taught to do, we're probably going to not have the same return on our investment of time and energy as if we had pursued the others. So can we do that last one, please?
Yes. All right. And last and final poll. So things come easier to you that are the same things that come easier to everyone else. Let me say that again. Things that come easy to you are the same things that come easy to everyone else. True or false? And Jason, everyone is saying false.
False. That sounds right to me too. I think that's a little easier one. Some of these are a little leading, but we're just getting warmed up. So trying to give us something to work with.
All
Thank you,
right.
Sam.
Yes.
So I'll just jump right in with, since we have a basic understanding of the strengths, I'm going to share a little bit about mine. Strengths often show up when we're younger in our life. So I wanted to share a quick story about how my top 5 came through on a backpacking trip. I was leading the group. This was a Boy Scout trip. This was in New Mexico, and there were adult leaders present, but I was doing the decision making. They were the safety net. And my strengths came through in a few different ways. Strategic came through where I naturally would see the path forward. I could differentiate very intuitively between a lot of options. And when we've got a bunch of people trying to make it from point A to point B in a given day, and 14 straight days of that in a row, had a big impact on morale, on how folks were doing. So strategic helped me have that clear path forward. It also helped me understand things intuitively in the context of the trip. If we had a rainy day and we had heavy gear the next day because all of our stuff was wet and we're moving forward, and I needed to kind of appreciate what that was going to do on the morale for the group. And my individualization, if you look a few bullets down, that showed up by my mind just naturally noticed who connected with who during the trip. And that was an example of, I didn't need to be the person who spoke with them, but I did need to make sure that they had what they needed. And I could find ways to help the group come together. So 2 quick examples there. I think you'll find things in your life as you read these reports, or if you dig into strengths further, where they just showed up when you were younger. These are things that, again, you naturally think, feel, and behave. So if it comes to you that way, it makes sense it's going to show up when you're a kid, when you're less conditioned to be a certain way based on what your environment calls for. So a separate example, a time when I leverage my strengths in a work context, as a coach. The strategic helps me see the path when I'm talking with a client. It helps me understand among those different options, which one might be more likely to have impact for them. My activator helps me get things into motion. I can navigate a bunch of different ideas and help a group come together, or an individual really find some leverage to not only get moving now, but to have that sustained momentum over time. The individualization comes through as we're tailoring approaches to meet folks where they're at and really have layered significance for them. I'm going to stop there for the time we have, but a few examples of how you might want to communicate your strengths to others. It doesn't only have to be, Gallup called it XYZ trademarked term. It could be something that's a very practical, workable, usable language and tool. And most of what we're going to do today is in a conversational format, much like that. You don't necessarily need to have all the terms exactly right for today to be a success. So I'm going to get us to my overview that I'm talking about. I've set up the flow today in the name it, claim it, and aim it format. So We'll go through each of those as we progress, but we're going to have some time at the end for question and answers and recap of some of the resources we discussed together. So you can choose which ones fit for you and apply those as you see fit. A few learning objectives on our right. We're going to make sure that you gain familiarity with your top talent themes and resources to leverage those and develop them into strengths. We're going to unpack a lot of these definitions, but from those, we're going to have concrete strategies. So this will make more sense in a few moments, that second bullet. Take a quick look at this. The nature of business and the work environment are rapidly changing. The dynamics will continue to shift as generations are varying in the workforce. There's new norms, changes in market competition and other external forces. Increasingly, it's important for us to own our development. And Gallup has found through all this research and extensive data collection that the numbers show, the data demonstrates our greatest potential, one's individual greatest potential for success is grounded in that, that mindset of that strengths-based development. So the solution, Clifton Strengths, that's the tool we're going to talk about today. There's a few things that it can do for you right away. We'll do some of these together and we'll get you positioned to take that next step on your own from there. So I mentioned name it, claim it, aim it. We're going to start with name it. And essentially that means we identify the talents that specifically resonate with you. We asked you before this session to print off your strengths signature themes report. And from there, highlight the sentences or phrases that really stood out to you, what resonated most. And sometimes just knowing that, that's really, I think, the essence of this. Is it's not what you call it only, it's really what it does for you. So we'll dig into that a little bit here. Gallup, you probably have heard of the Gallup poll. If you aren't as familiar with the Gallup organization, they've been immersed in business and data. They have over 2 million interviews with folks studying this over 3 decades. They've found high reliability, statistical significance among all their data processes. And I'm not going to dig into that today. Today's webinar really presumes that you have a preliminary understanding of your top talent themes. And generally, it makes sense to you that we should leverage what we're wired for. And that's the premise I'm going to dig into a little bit more for us here. And we'll see what you think at the end. Let's do a quick activity. I could say all this great stuff. I could show you stats, but let's see what you think. Could you please make 2 lines on your piece of paper next to you? Find something, scrap piece of paper to write with. Maybe if you have a fancy thing, you could put this up on the fridge tonight when you're talking about this webinar at home over dinner. We're going to time you writing out something here in a second. Please hold off until I get started. I'm going to ask that you start with that line on the left side. And I'm going to time this because that's going to matter. So we're going to ask you to raise your hand when you're done with the task. On the bottom right is where the raise hand feature is. If I'm missing anything here, Sam, please feel free to jump in, but I'm going to keep moving. So we're going to have us get started here, and I'm going to time us. Sam, will you please let me know when the raise hands come up?
I'm on it.
And help me on the timing? Thank you. Okay, as fast as you can, I'm going to ask you on that left line to, wait for it, I'm going to ask you to write out something, and then we're going to time you. So don't start till I say go. The phrase is go Buffs. And we're going to have you get started now. Start writing out go Buffs on that line and hit raise hand when you're done.
All right, Jason, we've got the majority of folks who are done at 10 seconds.
Awesome. Wow, pretty impressive. Let's go to that other side. We're going to do that line on the right side of the page. We're going to have a similar type of instruction. Essentially, you're going to write a phrase. I'm going to time you. This time, though, let's use your other hand. Would you use your non-dominant hand to write the same phrase? Don't start yet. I got a timer ready. Go. Right, go Buffs on that right side line with your non-dominant hand. And then hit raise hand when you're done. We'll know you timed it.
All right, Jason, and we've got the majority of the group here done.
What's our timing looking like?
It was about 17 seconds when I started talking.
Wow. Well, I like that activity. If you're like the people I've worked with in the past, I've been doing this particular one for 15 years or so. When we start to write this out, it's not a difficult task. It's a mundane, basic thing we would do. But using the other hand often makes it feel foreign, strange, uncomfortable, slow, cumbersome. All these things that if you were to extrapolate that and impose that on, say, a work context, if I was hiring you and managing your performance, I'd sure prefer you got that task done over the course of your week or month or career in 10 seconds on each iteration as opposed to 17. Mostly, I like this activity because it helps us start to feel how different it could be. And as you start to understand your strengths better, most people report that they feel it in a similar level. It's as much or more awkward as it was to do that writing activity. All right, so our next one, a bit of data for those that like that. I mentioned that there was this assumption in the strengths-based development that weakness fixing prevents failure. I'm not suggesting you can have critical flaws or holes in the boat, so to speak, but let's look at aptitude. If we have on the left two bars, the vertical bars, they are an average aptitude. And on the right side is someone with an above average aptitude. So the premise here is I am having a second repetition, practicing reading the same passage, and it measured how much the time length was. So with minimal or limited aptitude, I'm going to have some progress over time with dedicated intentional development. If I was to instead focus on areas that I am truly wired for, so to speak, I'm going to have a much greater level of progress, a greater return on my energy and other investment of resources. There's actually a lot of data and science that as we understand neuroscience better, we are finding that there was some evolutionary biology at play here. We're created to have some differentiators, and we have greater clusters of neurotransmitters in our brain in those areas that we naturally think, feel, and behave. That's part of why we more intuitively go there and more effectively navigate there. So I think that also speaks to this aptitude component. I'm going to leave it there for now. As I said, we're trying to illustrate these ideas a little bit better for you, but in the time we have, we're going to focus more on applying this to contexts that matter to you today. So here are those concepts and the foundational definitions. We're talking about talent. That's a natural way you think, feel, or behave. Talent's really who you are. I have investment in that middle box. If you can invest some intentional developmental progress, the 10,000 hours that Malcolm Gladwell talks about is that same premise. But as we grow, as we develop in this way, whatever amount of time we have, our best ROI is normally going to be in an area of high talent concentration. So strengths are the developed output, the product over time that is the ability to have consistent near perfect performance in a structured activity. Strengths are essentially what we do. Let Sam know if there's any questions. I want to make sure we're okay on this first part.
All looks good now, Jason. You may have covered this a little bit, but there's just a question about taking strengths more than once and having your strengths, your top 5 differ a little bit each time.
That is a great question. At the end, I'm going to go into this a little bit more, and I have it written out if that's how you learn better. But I'll briefly speak to the question now. There are 34 talent themes that Gallup has identified. These are clusters of talent. So it's not so precise that it's a one and done. They have found that these assessments, the StrengthsFinder assessment will have a very similar top 10, no matter how many times you take it, no matter how much time varies between when you first take it and next or last take it. So again, these are how we're naturally wired. If you look at personality assessments, sometimes our personalities can change over time, but the way, based on what we are doing in our life, what was required of us, who we need to be for those we care about or the work we do, talent, the things that energize us, the things that we intuitively go to, that's not going to shift from when you're a child to when you're an adult. And for that reason, this assessment has that high reliability and won't normally change. They do say the top 10 could shift a bit. Some of that is as we grow and mature, or again, what's required of us. But overall, it's essentially the same content. I myself did it and had two separate strengths or that swapped in my top 10. And that's exactly what they predicted. You're welcome to do it. It's normally not going to change much, and that's why they don't recommend that. We'll come back to that at the end if there's additional questions. So I wanted to, since we talked about naming it, we have a basic sense of what we're talking about, what we're working on together, and what we mean by it. So claiming it is really about appreciating that power or the potential of it, maybe the limits of it, and what opportunities exist. So we're going to focus there. There are 5 experiential clues to talent that Gallup has found show up and really reveal some of these strengths in action. A yearning to do this, things you're naturally drawn to do or interested in, a rapid learning. What kinds of activities do you seem to pick up quickly? Flow. What activities are you in when you just automatically know the steps to be taken? You lose track of time. Glimpses of excellence. They mean with that phrase, during what activities have you had moments of subconscious excellence when you thought, how did I do that? Satisfaction. That's one of the telltale signs. What activities give you a kick, a boost of energy, either while you're doing them or immediately after finishing them? If you're a to-do list person and you cross that off the list, that might be a similar type of satisfaction. When you are in that strengths place, many times you'll feel many of these, and often that's partially why it's such a powerful experience for folks. So I want to give you a few things we're talking about claiming this for you. I'm talking generally about people. Here are some things that you could do, you could start to think about, you could apply with you, for yourself, people that know you well. That same report that you printed off and highlighted, the Signature Themes report, that will continue to be available to you from Gallup throughout forever. All this information will be on that portal and dedicated to you. So you'll be able to reference things like this, additional reports and resources that they have. These are activities and reflections that I've worked with groups and individuals quite a bit over the years. We found things like this have been really helpful in revealing what we're focused on together. When we're having a conversation and we're talking about what you've observed about me, or what I've observed about you, what I've observed about myself, what my intended actions we're trying to create, and what others experienced, conversations like that can naturally flow out of a strengths conversation with something as basic as what's on this screen. Getting that outside perspective from someone that knows you well is one of the most powerful things I hear folks talk about. I think you could just do a quick email. Gallup actually has a tab, a little prompt on their portal that says, send this to a friend, and you can say, hey, how's this match up with what you've observed? Does this seem like me to you? So I want to share a few ideas for you to take and run with. I'm going to move on to that upticks in motivation idea. So one activity I've personally found helpful is something that I adapted from Marcus Buckingham. He was one of the original founding authors and thought leaders on the strengths movement. He was working with Gallup. I believe he was there 20 years, and he has done his own thing. And his premise is largely, regardless of what the trademark name is, how does this actually impact you and the work you care about? How does this show up for you? So one of the tools he's came up with, I've adapted, I use personally, is what he called the green card, red card. And essentially he did an audit of his week. After each activity, I used a note card and I just put some red highlights on the one side and green highlights on the other top bar. And I created a visual audit of my week. In just a few seconds after each thing, was this energized or not? That meeting was great. I like that we could collaborate. That spreadsheet took my focused energy. I should have done that first thing in the day when I was fresh. Things like that were what I wrote. But one of the biggest surprising impacts for me was when I looked back on my table at the end of the week, when I had all my cards laid out, and I got to see how many reds and how many greens were there for me that week. And I got to, in that moment, kind of process, well, there was this circumstance and I get this. But it also left me with an opportunity to work on that. Could I get a few less reds in the next week? I bet I could get one. What could I do to make one less red card next week? And the following, and the next week. And over time, little realistic, practical, action-oriented changes can really reveal radical changes in your life. So that was the idea. This impacts my motivation. This impacts morale. This impacts what energy I have left at the end of the day for my family. This impacts Overall, the relationships I have in the office, for me, this was just a really revealing and practical tool. I've been able to both structure my week differently as a result and share this premise with other folks who've done the same. So I hope you find some value in it too. We're going to show you another resource here. So this was the report I believe you printed. I hope you printed. That top part, I just wanted to emphasize, anybody who has that theme, strategic in this case, all the folks that have strategic will have that same shared theme description, the 2-sentence-ish overview. But then when you get a little deeper, this is specifically me or you. So the highlighted stuff, there's a reason you probably had some things that really sounded like you. It is a collaboration, or excuse me, all your strengths in conjunction with each other, your themes, is what this speaks to. And again, they've got those millions and millions of data interviews and iterations to help us really have some reliable tendencies that this can not only reveal, but help us leverage in actionable ways. Each of these reports is going to have some how to apply this stuff, much like we're talking about with this AIM IT concept next. So AIM IT is the strategies that you can read here, but you're going to invest in developing this. You're intentional. You are going to be focused on what have I done well or not. You're going to have some objective assessment, perhaps an accountability partner, ultimately trying to find ways to flex these talents to have positive outcomes in contexts that you care about, a work outcome at home, a cause or community that you're passionate about. Ultimately, we better respond to situations more effective. That's why I'm a big fan of strengths. Application though, I want to help you get this into action for you. If you were thinking about this in a future context, do you think any questions like this would be helpful for you? It doesn't only have to be strengths that you can think through these types of future-oriented, what do I want my job to be about? What do I want my impact to be? What kind of lifestyle do I want? What problems do I want to solve? What value do I want to add? What role does this have for me in conjunction with the other things in my life? Those are all important questions in my mind. If you're adding the strengths component to that, you're going to really be aligning with things that give you sustained success over time, because you're going to continue to grow and get better as you develop in those. Real quick poll here. Sam, do we have this one queued up?
We do not, but I can get it in here quickly. Give me just a moment.
I apologize. Sure.
No worries.
Thanks. So I'll read this off. So we're talking a little about aiming this. We're talking a little bit about you personally. I'm also thinking about you as a leader. You're going to continue to have success in your career, especially if you align yourself with strategies that increase the likelihood of excellence. There's a reason you stand out when you're being authentic. And so as Gallup they do the State of the American Workforce report. It's a comprehensive report. There's also international ones. There's a variety of things. Based on their recent data, can you wager a guess on which one of these percentages represents the folks that say being able to do the work that I'm best at is important to me?
You're almost there. Just a moment, everyone.
You get time to process.
All right. So what do we think? Percentage points are left off, but I think everyone will get the gist. So 29%, 47%, 60%, or 83%? We'll give it a few more moments here. All right, looks like the majority have shared their response. So I'll go ahead and share those results. So Jason, 66% say that 83% feel the work I do is the work I do best is very important to me. And then the next is 60% and 47%. No one said 29%.
What do you think it is, Sam? Putting you on the hot seat.
Well, my top strength is positivity, so I'm gonna go with 83%.
I like it. That's great. Thanks for playing along.
Yep.
Well, the Gallup survey, what this is actually just out this past month. They showed 60% of employees reported that the ability to do what they do best was a major factor in considering whether they take a job in a different organization. The only thing that was on par with that was the role itself. The top two considerations were the role and will I get to do what I want to do, what I'm wired for, what I enjoy doing, what I'm good at. So um, this is a true pressure point. It's often reported as a myth, and talent, attracting and retaining top talent, that's the way of the future. That's partially why strengths is such a popular tool, but that's also why it's such a valuable tool. It serves this need effectively and extremely well. So we had talked before about how you navigate strengths and development in your own career. I want to think about how this could impact groups of people you work with. These could be peers that you're on a team with. This could be an organization. This could be you as the leader of an organization or a team. And there are these domains that a lot of the leadership behaviors seem to come through in. So strategic thinking is usually the group that maps out the plan. Those executing folks get that plan done. The relationship folks keep people at the table. The influencers get them there in the first place. There's a lot of ways where everybody doing their own thing isn't necessarily practical. I'm not suggesting that we need this perfect state utopia to be able to implement these things, but using things like this team for performance focused or these 4 domains of team strengths, that's a way that we can make this practical for organizations. So the premise with strengths-based development includes, I can't have critical flaws or weaknesses that I just avoid. I do have to make sure that I shore those up. But most of the highest achievers, they tend to get there by having complementary partners to fill those gaps for them so that they can do what they're best at. Sometimes they can do what only they can do. That type of thinking is the premise for this 4 domains and how not only it shows up, but how you can leverage it for team success. So if you have any questions, we can come back to that one. Get another audience poll for us here. If you had to guess, we can have you write in on this one. That was our, would you say, which of these strengths would you say was the most common across all the strengths assessments that have been done? Over 2 million. Can we access that, Sam? Is that on? Do we turn on the chat option?
Yep, so if you don't mind chatting in your response, and then I will share out. So Jason, it looks like a lot of achiever, a couple woos.
Yeah.
Responsibility is showing up.
Nice.
Someone changed to responsibility. Maximizer, lots of achiever.
Yeah. I will talk you through these real briefly and see if that changes any of your responses. So achiever tends to be about the energy, the uptick. It comes from crossing it off the list, the accomplishment. That is, there's a bias towards action, and default is go. Let's get this done. Activator is pretty similar, but they don't necessarily care about finishing it. They get their energy from starting it. So they have to make sure they build in those either complementary partners or timelines or whatever metrics they do to make sure that they're effective for themselves and others. But they, in the moment, have this unique ability to harness them, individuals, whomever is present, and just say, well, okay, we got these ideas. Let's not leave the scene of a goal without taking action or implementing a plan. Step 1, what can we do? Go. You need activators in your life, some way, shape, or form. Or at least you're better for having them there. Competition, sometimes it's about, if there's not a game to win, it could be less exciting to engage. And a lot of folks in our corporate environments or our high achievers are definitely wired to have competition in there. There's some energy in competing. You notice when you're walking down the hall if that person's a little bit faster. You're the one that's at the stoplight, like ready to go. So it's just, again, how we're wired. Harmony. Harmony is one of my favorites because I've seen it show up in different ways. It's one that continually surprises me personally. Generally, though, I see people, one of two things tend to show up for harmony. It's important to have that harmony, so I'm going to avoid conflict, maybe. And that's not necessarily where I'm comfortable or if it's worth it. I certainly don't get my energy from being in that conflict space because harmony is important to me. On the other side of that, harmony is really important to me. I'm going to jump right into conflict if that's what it takes so that we can achieve that great harmony, that true, holistic, that healthy mix. So I like that example for that reason. Spoiler alert, that was not the most common. The maximizer is another one that's on here for a reason. I think many of us have seen that in our circles or the organizations that we work in. There's a strong value in taking something good and making it great. And there's less excitement in starting from scratch. There's less excitement in figuring out navigating the routes or picking the best option. So very basic generalizations, but just kind of speaking to a little bit more of what these actually do for folks. The responsibility is often going to be that inner drive and desire to make sure that you have not let folks down, you have fulfilled all the obligations to yourself and others, you have these standards that you need to meet. You're probably the one that didn't necessarily love your teammates in those group projects because maybe seemed like they might have been slacking a little with all the knowing you'd make sure it got done well. A lot of our top achievers do have responsibility. It's one of the drivers that gets them there. They make sure that they fulfill all the needs of the people around them in a really unique way that, again, you're lucky to have folks like that in your world. Woo. Woo not only describes what it means, it originally came about as winning others over. That's the crowd that's thinking out loud, that's constantly making friends everywhere they go. There's no strangers in this person's world. They are going to be a blast to be around. At the same time, there's trade-offs to all these. If taken to an extreme, it could be detrimental if we're, depending on the context we're working in specifically. But all right. Any changes in your answers? A couple more seconds and I'll move forward unless I hear.
Looks like everyone's eager to hear what the top one is.
Dun, dun, dun.
So, yes.
It is Achiever. Achiever is the top one by a lot. Maybe that's who takes the test. Or the organizations that bring this in have, often had that archetype in their mix. But yes, so just a fun way to think through some of those, I thought. Here are some ideas for you to consider moving forward. I want to just briefly mention these because you can look into these now that you know what they're called. Strengths-based development is this idea that if we can invest time in growing, if we can do what we're wired for and develop in that way, and if we can build and seek out structures with complementary partners, we can have more success as individuals and organizations. That was a lot, but luckily there's a book, videos, podcasts, reports on the portal that you already have access to for free. Lots of ways to dig into this if you were so interested. Power and edge, that's a fun one to start with, and you can continue to go back to that one throughout the time you're working with strengths. The power is rooted in that potential. So if you can find ways to recognize that, it often makes more sense. It becomes more practical to build it into your world and things you're doing and where you're headed. The balconies and basements, when they're at their best or worst, again, to an extreme, it's not going to be helpful. We're talking about impact on others and business outcomes. So we need to make sure that we have this balance. But also recognizing when I'm at my best and when I'm at my worst with this strength, that's extremely revealing. That's powerful for working with your supervisor, working with partners, for leading folks and having conversations with them. Any of these things I'm talking about for us as individuals, this could just be a playbook for how you start talking with your team. If you're leading a group right now and this feels like a conversation you'd like to have. I love these conversations because this is a pro-social model. It focuses on what we're best at. This model really started when one of the early founders, Don Clifton, was noticing in all the years of psychological research, everything was about what's wrong with us. There weren't strategies about what's best with us. He would say, study the best if you want to achieve excellence. Don't focus on what's wrong. That's only going to get you to not fail. So there's a reason a lot of organizations choose this, and it's having impacts that they're hoping for. I think you'd find that too. The full 34, that is something you have to pay extra to get. And that is all 34 in conjunction with each other. That top 10 or so is your dominant talents. Those you really have to turn off for them to not be there. They just intuitively are where you start. They're the best way that you know how to get there. And often they're the only way that makes sense to you. So anything in that top 10-ish, maybe even top 12, is normally going to be a significant area to develop in. So one of the reasons you'd want a report like that is to better understand how to aim your efforts. The supporting talents are ones that show up periodically but aren't always present, aren't necessarily the best or most advantageous for ROI purposes. Lesser talents are what they call that bottom 5 or 10, and that's going to be something that may or may work for you. It probably doesn't give you that uptick in energy to the level that is comparable to some of the others on the same list. So it's probably the lesser of your time and energy. It may be a great place to think about, who are my complementary partners? Who gets excited about doing this stuff that I'm either not into or not so hot at? A lot of things that you can do individually. You can use the provided reports and so forth if you choose this, and also coaches and supervisors. A lot of internal companies have resources related to these types of conversations. You happen to have some pretty cool access with leads as well. Their career development team and also CU's career services and student affairs both have resources for alumni to plug into, including things with strengths. So a few more as we're starting to transition to questions here. The blended resources, there's a lot of stuff that's free online. YouTube, there's Theme Thursdays. They take between 1 minute and 3 minute videos. And those are prevalent for each of the themes. That's a separate resource, excuse me. Theme Thursdays are a longer version where they have a few folks get on and talk about what it's like to have that theme for them. A lot of companies have recreated that concept internally and had a informal or a peer-led group, or maybe a organizational development team is up there helping to facilitate a time when people can come together and say, here's a few folks internally that have this. And little by little, you help folks get exposure to this and each other and learn more about how we're wired and what's best about us. Gallup has some great podcasts. A lot of independent coaches and consultants have related materials, just simple searches of strengths and podcasts or streaming apps. Peer-led groups is another great way to get there. It's free, it's easy. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have all of the nuanced language. You can advance, you can grow, you can move a little bit forward. You can certainly take that next step by having basic conversations with folks about how you've seen your strengths come through, what you've seen in others. So want to make sure you knew you had good options available. In that Gallup portal, they call it the Strength Center, there is videos for your specific strengths. In that same report that you printed, just up the screen is going to be each of your strengths, and there's going to be PDFs that you can download. There's videos that talk about that specific theme and the definitions, and they show folks talking about what it's like for them to have that. So a ton of great content there. And then you could also, there's certainly plenty of folks out there, myself included, that are strengths performance coaches. I do executive and leadership coaching as well, organizational development that leverages strengths. So there's a ton of great options out there if this is something that is a good fit for you. We talked a little about those resources. If we have some time at the end, I was going to show you where they are. I'm going to pause and kind of wrap up the content and then get those questions, and we'll come back to the recap at the end. I did get a few questions in advance. I thought I'd just mention those here. And while I'm talking through these, if you have any additional questions that aren't on this list, feel free to send those in to Sam. Sam, do you have anything to say before I move forward with these audience questions that I had a preview to?
I don't. It's all you.
All right. Well, we're spot on here. This is awesome.
It's great.
Right at our timeline. So strengths versus DISC or other assessments and instruments. These all measure tendencies. If you do anything with emotional intelligence, it often starts with the self-awareness that precedes the self-regulation. These measure that tendency and give you some additional self-awareness. They offer a common platform for groups. You have a shared language, you have a shared model. They do have the risk of barrier labels. There can be a perception that some are better or worse than others. There can be a perception of, well, I'm not wired for that, so I can't do that. And so there is some, in all of these models, it's not a perfect silver bullet solution kind of thing. There is there's some nuance, there's some ongoing. I think getting involved for most folks is a great use of their time and energy. Most folks are not going to be worse off for growing and developing in these areas. You got to get a little further down the road before you get to that place where you're at the risk of those barrier labels. So somebody asked another question. How do you answer the question, what do you want to do with your life? I'm going to focus on the strengths-based approach. That's why you brought me here today. The strengths would say that you are going to have greater levels of impact, success, happiness, and overall wellness if you do what you're wired for. They have data in a book called Wellness. It's a data-heavy book. If you like that, you're going to love that book. And it talks about the different levels of medical issues reported, stress levels, cholesterol, heart attacks, other types of stroke, and issues that people have experienced because of the strain of their work environment and any other life stressors. Building in strengths more often is one of those ways that you can have holistic and healthy bits of energy. You're going to have also great ways to apply that. Most people that got a little mixed up there. The best in the world don't get there the same way, but if you have your strengths at the core of it, you're going to be happy with the result. It's going to be feeding your soul. It's going to be giving you good energy. You're probably going to naturally know how to do it and be better at it. There's a reason this all comes together. So for the entrepreneurial question, how does strengths play into the entrepreneurship specifically? What you build and how you build it are impacted by how you're wired. So having that awareness is going to help you see more pieces of this. It's going to be more effective for you personally, and as you're structuring groups or leading teams, supporting or supervising individuals, it's going to give you more insight to connect with them and help them achieve your common goals. They have a tool, a resource called the Builder Profile 10, and it has 10 domains that they've observed to be common and prevalent among successful entrepreneurs. They give you action items as well as the assessment to reveal all the components of it. And there's a ton of great resources affiliated with that. It's one of their newer options, and it's helping a lot of entrepreneurs who struggle with things like the loneliness of that journey and some of the ups and downs and the delayed gratification and a lot of those challenges. When you can better understand how to get there most effectively for you, they're getting a ton of great feedback as a result. So Q12 is their engagement model. It's 12 questions, and it talks about what types of things I shared earlier that 60% of folks were looking for opportunities to do what they do best. The Q12 survey reveals those types of things. And I believe that's question 3 on that one. But there's those, you can look online for Q12 engagement questions, and it'll show you the list of things that the most successful organizations seem to focus on. They definitely inquire about in some way, shape, or form. Entrepreneurs, we talked about those 4 domains of team strength, doing those things that only you can do. That's one of the hallmarks of a lot of the entrepreneurs I've talked with, and finding people who can complement those. Again, having that model that they can grow into as well. You want to keep those folks around. It takes a while to find great people, and you want to make sure you're developing them. There's plenty of others. I'm going to move on to that next question. I love this question. How do I communicate my strengths to hiring managers without just saying, I've done StrengthsFinder? You do not want to say, I've done StrengthsFinder and stop there. That is a great note. there is a tool called the theme map that a coach can help you with. I presume you could find online. They ask some questions about what's the value I bring, and they start to talk about it in those terms. What are the characteristics that describe me? What's the role I play in a team or in a work environment? What are my motivations? And then with some nuance, what are the needs that I have? These are the things that I'm really looking for in a work environment because these are important for long-term success, and we're both looking for a long-term fit, that kind of a thing. I shared earlier, there's some great resources on campus you have access to as alumni online and or on campus, I suppose. And there's a ton of great books, thought leader resources, so many wonderful ones by Gallup and several others I'm a fan of that are by thought leaders formerly affiliated with Gallup too. When I think about communicating my strengths to a hiring manager, I think about what do they care about? What's their question? And they're asking, is this person a fit? Is this person somebody who can solve our problems, who we want to spend however many hours a week with, that has potential to really do well here, blah, 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 on and on. So I think when you can start to think about, I bring these things to a team. I'm energized by this, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to contribute that to the mission of this organization. When you can structure into more things that they care about, and some folks like to talk in terms of their weaknesses here. They'll use that shadow side of the strength as a way to talk through. So that might be another aspect to consider. I know several books that talk about really communicating what you're wired for, whether you talk in terms of strengths or something else. What color is your parachute? That's a great resource that's been around forever, and they're constantly updating it. I've reviewed the current version. It's got a lot of questions that relate to your specific question here. So I think those exercises would help you get at the root of what your answer is. So what results can help a business achieve? Can you ignore weaknesses? I mentioned earlier you can't ignore weaknesses completely, but the high achievers and the highest achievers that Gallup has observed tend to have complementary partners and structures to offset those weaknesses. What results can help a business achieve? Well, if you look up at that entrepreneurial one, it's the same ones here. I was personally on the Charles Schwab organizational development team, and we're one of the case studies from Gallup. They were saying look at how Schwab did this massive turnaround in engagement. Look at how they've leveraged their strengths across the company. Over 97% of the new employees take the Strengths Finder and have that common language and leverages the tool and ongoing performance conversations. There's a ton of organizations that are doing it just like that, or in other ways that are similarly good, equally good, that kind of thing. Talking about engagement, that's an area that if you use Gallups or not, you want to make sure you're understanding what people are looking for. You're going to spend a lot of your time filling vacancies, hiring great people, dealing with challenges if you're not effectively attracting and retaining folks, if you're not engaging them along the way and helping them grow. And increasingly, that's what's available to folks. And they're choosing organizations, the best folks are choosing organizations that can deliver on that front. I think the business results so perhaps limited turnover is a shorter answer there. Greater levels of engagement, higher levels of output, greater levels of satisfaction reported, sometimes higher levels of trust, which can increase the speed of operating. Several other examples in those reports that you can find online if you search for how does strengths help businesses achieve results. Gallup specializes in that. They'll give you more than you want, probably. Okay, what other questions do we have?
All right, so one question, you had mentioned a book when you first started talking through these questions that we received during the registration. Was it, do you mind mentioning the title again? Was it Wellness?
Yeah.
Is that the title?
Gallup, the title is Wellness, yes.
Okay.
And that is, if you like the white papers, you're going to love that resource. It's going to have tons of good data for you.
Great. Thank you. And then another question. So when you were talking through talent and investing in developing your talent earlier on in the webinar, do you have a recommendation or are there best practices on the appropriate amount of time to invest in your talent or strengthening your strengths? Is there kind of a magic?
That's
magic
cool. That's a
time?
great question. I it's my answer is that I think it has to fit your life. It has to be practical. I personally find a monthly recap of professional development suits me very well. I put a little time in on a weekend morning, once a month-ish, and I just do a quick check-in, and I adjust as I need to. I think about what I've learned. I think about how has this recent month or time frame since I last did this contributed to my goals, and what do I want to do moving forward. That's my monthly thing. And on a weekly basis, actually right now it's about bi-weekly. I do it about twice a month. I reflect on those cards, and most weeks I still do a pretty good job of making notes. I've just seen a really powerful impact from that visual. That's a way that I learn well. So I think that working with a coach or somehow having some investment, when you have that buy-in, when I've paid money to work with a coach, or if I've got an accountability partner and for that just drives me, somehow getting some skin in the game is going to be a strategy that helps most people really find that strength gets practical and applied. It's easy to get lost in thinking about this and nice ideas and lose sight of this is about business outcomes at its core. So the context we're talking about today, at least. So I think that working with a partner is a great way to do that. And that's also probably that hour a month, or depending on your engagement, it might be a bi-weekly thing, but an
Great.
hour-ish a month, a couple hours a month, that's a ballpark in my mind.
Yeah. I think what's important about
I
what you
think
said is really finding what works for you. You know, there's not a magic number. It's what are you putting in that makes you feel like you're moving forward.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
yeah, so there's, that's what I've got for us, unless you have any other questions.
Yeah, so one question, Jason, it looks like folks are having trouble finding the wellness book. Could it possibly
Hmm.
be well-being? Is that what it is?
It is.
Well-being,
I
the
apologize.
five?
Yes,
Yeah,
it is well-being.
no worries. All right, so it's
Thank you.
called, yep, So it's called Well-being. It's the Five Essential Elements, and it's by Tom Rath and Jim Harder. For anyone who's looking
Yeah.
to get some more data on strengths and dive in there. Um, and then we do have a couple more minutes, Jason, for one last question. Have you seen any data from Gallups around if there are certain populations around the world that are taking this test, or different positions that tend to skew higher in certain strengths? So like, for example, are CFOs more responsible? Do they have that responsibility strength more often than not?
Great question. I have not personally seen a ton of recent data that speaks to that. In my training years ago, there was some emphasis on the best in the role get there in a variety of ways, so they don't always see a particular strength show up in a role, but they often do see those four domains show up in a pattern. So somehow or another, they have found a way to be excellent in this space. That's what got them to this higher level. There's not a playbook that says this correlates to XYZ that
Sure.
I'm familiar with.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you for taking that assessment and discovering your top 5 strengths. We hope that it helps you both in your current career and any future steps that you take, both personally and professionally. And Jason, again, thank you so much for guiding us through this and all of the great information. So wonderful.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thank you.
If I can help further, feel free to reach out. I love talking about this stuff with folks. I'm available for to be a coach, but also just I like having these conversations, and I'd be happy to share resources with folks and point them in the right direction with no business relationship involved. Love what CU's up to, and love to support the Buffs. So
Wonderful.
thank you, Sam.
Thank you. Yes. And a quick reminder to everyone to view upcoming webinars that we have scheduled, and then to view any previous recordings. Do please visit our website at colorado.edu/alumni/webinars, and have a great rest of your day, and go Buffs.